Hello and welcome to another episode of Ewell Acres. Today we're going to continue on with our beekeeping discussion. We're going to be talking about 4 more tools that are not necessary for you to do beekeeping, but will help you to be more successful. Let's get started. Now, when you're looking at different tools to utilize in beekeeping, there is a large amount. There are many tools out there, some that are necessary to have, some that are not necessary, but make your life a whole lot easier as you get further down the road into beekeeping. But when you're dealing with it, there are large, significant upfront costs that are to deal, or even just upkeep costs when you're looking at beekeeping, and so sometimes you need to manage where you want to spend your money at. Well, this list can help kind of narrow it down to decide, is this one of those tools that I want to get? Now, the first item on this list is called a pollen trap. Now, what that is as the bees are going out, they're foraging for food, they're coming and going. This is a device that you can put on the front of the hive, so when the bees are returning, some of that pollen is going to be falling off their legs and falling into this trap. Now, some people don't like using pollen traps because it's going to pull some of the material that they're trying to collect and not be able to utilize and collect it for yourself for future use. I personally occasionally use a pollen trap on some of my hives because what it does is it allows 2 different things. There are some people that like to purchase pollen on the side for allergy uses. They like to put a little bit in their tea or add it to their honey artificially, so that way it gives them a little bit more of a resistance to local allergies in your area. Another thing that makes a good pollen trap is during high summer, spring, you're going to have what's called the Nectar Flow. There's going to be a significant large amount of food for the bees to be able to gather. So what you can do is use the pollen trap to collect pollen that they're bringing in when there is an excess of material, and you can save it for a rainy day. When it starts to be a little bit rough and it's a little bit harder for those bees to find stuff, what you can do, pull the pollen out, set it in a pile in front of the hive, and so the bees can collect that on another day if they're getting a little bit more starving for your bees. And what that will allow you to do is that will allow you to source your own pollen to supplementally feed your bees. Commonplace, what's used is what's called a pollen patty, and that is a food substitute or a protein source for your bees to use in times of dearth. By using a pollen trap, that will allow you to collect pollen that is naturally in your area that's going to be healthier for the bees, and you're not having to spend extra money on the pollen substitute patties. Keep in mind, this is a living organic source, though, for the pollen. And so this is not something that you can store 5-10 years long term. The older the pollen gets, the less nutritional value it will have. So if you are going to collect pollen, I would potentially recommend freezing it or storing it in some way so that way it can last a little bit longer. But typically, pollen that you've collected, the nutritional value will quickly diminish after a year or 2 that it's collected. So if you are going to collect it, keep it in constant rotation. Go ahead and add some so that way the bees can utilize it either that same season, or if it's early spring and you want them to start building up the stocks to get in preparation for that spring, go ahead and add some out so that way they have a pollen source that they can start collecting, even though the local forager flowers in your area may not actually start to be blooming yet. The next item on our list as tools that are not necessary to have that may be nice to experiment with has to do with equipment for the beehive itself. It's what's called a slatted rack bottom board. Now, this type of board is not common at all. It's actually kind of gone out of favor, but if you want to construct your own materials, this is something that you may want to consider. What it is it's a solid bottom board, but it actually has a giant open spot with strips of wood going along the side. What this will allow you to do is this will allow materials like, say, varroa mite, detritus material, when it gets dropped, it can actually fall through. So if you don't have access to hardware cloth or other netting material used on screen bottom boards, it will allow some of that material to fall through and not collect on the bottom. The other thing that it can actually be utilized for is to help with airflow during the summertime. During summertime, it can get really hot, and the bees need to constantly fan in air to help keep their own central system, to help keep the hive cool for the bees. By having a slatted bottom board, that will help with significantly more airflow to help keep the hive cool during those hotter months. Now, this is a slatted board is something that was utilized a lot more often 20, 30 years ago when hardware cloth was not as commonly available. Now, having screen bottom boards with a hardware cloth, that has kind of replaced the slatted bottom board in common use in the beekeeping world. But if you want to experiment with it, it's there, go for it. I personally don't use them, I just use screen bottom boards, but why not? It might be something to take a look into. This third item that we have on this list has to deal with collecting new bees. It's what's called a swarm lure. Now, when you're dealing with beekeeping, there are a couple different ways that you can go about in acquiring new bees. You can go purchase packages, nukes, or full hives from a beekeeper that's already pre-existing. Sometimes, though, what can happen is there is bees, they grow too big for their hive and they decide they need to go find a new home. So the old queen and about half the bees will form what's called a swarm and just fly away to go find a new home. If you want to collect new bees without having to actually purchase bees, doing a swarm lure is a good way of going about doing that. What it is it's an old hive with some frames in it, or it could be as simple as a 5-gallon bucket, some sort of a container that says, bees, this is a good home for you to come and make home. You'll set it up in a tree somewhere, and as they're during swarm season, they'll go and find that, and that is a great way for you to actually go and get bees for free. Downside to it is you don't necessarily know the genetics of those bees, whether they're Italians, Carnolians, unless you're good at identifying the individual bee species. The good side, though, is this is a swarm of bees. They are strong, they've survived the winter, they're in your local area, so therefore they must come from relatively good stock or a relatively strong hive in order to be able to swarm. Now, how do you increase your chances? There are little attractant packets that you could use to throw into it. You can use essential oils like peppermint oil, lemongrass oil to make it smell like a hive to be more enticing. Is this a guaranteed way? No, but who knows? You might be able to acquire some free bees. These are just a few items that I personally think are some tools that are nice to have to help you continue on with your beekeeping if you want to. Did I miss some things? Are there some things that you are looking at this list that say, you know what? It really shouldn't be here. Let us know in the comments below what your thoughts are. Now, as a part of every one of these lists, I've got something that I think is absolutely important. And that is education, education, education. Learn as much as you can. Go to your local library, rent some books, go on internet, watch videos. It doesn't have to cost money. You can gain information for free. There is a significant amount out there. The more you learn, the more successful you'll be as a beekeeper. If you want to start having information on hand, purchasing books, whether they be digital or in print, by all means, go for it. I personally have done that myself. My library for beekeeping has been exponentially expanding every single year just because I'm constantly trying to figure out what new techniques there are out there. Whatever your method of gaining information is, I highly encourage you, no matter what stage of beekeeping, first year or been doing it for 50 years, learn as much as possible. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very glad to have you come and join us here. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to click on the subscribe button so that way you can join us. And for their videos, click the ringing bell for future videos that are coming out all the time. Once again, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.